Welcome to Legal Tech and LitFin. How will tech impact litigation finance globally? Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, John Freund. We're really excited for this panel discussion, very thoughtful, pertinent discussion on legal technology. Before we begin, I'm just going to go through some very brief housekeeping. So first of all, we are recording this event. You will all receive a link of the recording post-event. Please stay tuned for that email after the event is over. The format is going to be a panel discussion followed by a Q&A with you, the attendees. So there's two ways to ask questions. First, you can go through the LinkedIn comment section. Just add your question there at any point. Another way is to just email me directly, jfreund@litigationfinancejournal.com. That's JFREUND@litigationfinancejournal.com. I'll be monitoring both of those throughout the event. We'll get to as many questions as we can, time permitting. Also, we have, well, this is our last event of the year, but we're going to be having more events next year. We always welcome your suggestions for topics. Please email us at, again, jfreund@litigationfinancejournal.com with any event ideas. And lastly, we have memberships available. So, of course, we cover the industry, both commercial and consumer globally. So if you're interested, please visit www.litigationfinancejournal.com for more information. All right, with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Tets Ishikawa. Tets is the managing director of LionFish Litigation Finance, a UK-based litigation funder recently acquired by funds managed by Foresight Group, a private equity fund with $12.5 billion of assets under management. A former investment banker by trade, Tets has been involved in various asset classes throughout his career, including being invested himself in prop tech, and has closely followed how technology can add value to the litigation funding industry. The subject matter of this panel is one of great interest to him, and Tets jumped at the chance to act as a moderator of this panel. So we're really excited to introduce Tets. Please take it away. Tets, are you there?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, apologies, I didn't unmute myself, which helps. So to introduce our three panelists today, we have to start with Isabel Yishu, who is the founder and CEO of ArbiLex, which has been working on the application of predictive AI to high-stakes commercial litigation since 2019. The ArbiLex team consists of lawyers, engineers, and data scientists from Harvard, MIT, and CMU, and their data-driven marketplace platform enables alternative asset investors to originate and underwrite litigation-related investment opportunities at scale using its proprietary AI case rating system. Isabel holds a JD from Harvard Law School and an MSc from Oxford University. Next, we have Joshua Masia, who is the co-founder and CEO at DealBridge.ai, a generative AI platform for deal-making. Prior to founding DealBridge.ai, Josh held various data, technology, and product executive roles at JPMorgan Chase, BlackRock, and iCapital. He holds a BS in electrical engineering from the Pennsylvania State University. And then finally, we have Nick Rowles-Davies, who has been a leading figure in the legal finance industry for over 20 years. He is the CEO of Lexolent, which is the world's first globally coordinated origination network for legal finance professionals, providing a unique platform and marketplace where capital meets origination. He's a regular speaker and frequent media commentator on all aspects of litigation, the cost regime, litigation finance, legal expense insurance, and a wide variety of legal matters. So thank you all very much for joining. We are planning on covering kind of really three key broad areas today. One is really about the legal tech landscape and what it looks like. The next is then how that's really driving litigation funding, and then finishing off with kind of the risk and benefits. But it's going to be a relatively free-flowing discussion. So to the extent that it kind of veers off and there are topics within that you'd like to cover, please do send through questions through to John. But to start off with, the legal tech landscape. I mean, legal tech is obviously quite a broad term used. It can mean, everything really from enhanced technology. So whether that's virtual hearings, electronic filings into court, document management systems, through to enhanced data analytics of cases and artificial intelligence. So really to start with, I wanted to ask each of the panelists, what legal tech landscape meant to each of you and what it really means for your business and how your business kind of fits into this landscape. So Isabel, perhaps we can start off with you.
Thank you so much, Tets, and thank you, Litigation Finance Journal, for having me. I think we're in a very exciting time in legal tech, and where I sit, I primarily deal with the underlying technology being artificial intelligence. And I think in the past 5 years since I've started ArbiLex, the primary advances in advanced AI have primarily occurred out of language being the source data. And so from natural language processing to large language model to currently Gen AI, a lot of these text-based AI advancement all hold great significance for the practice of law. So from where I sit at ArbiLex, what that means for us is first of all, we're taking great advantage of the advancement in large language modeling to reduce the cost of data acquisition. And what that means is when we take court briefings and unstructured data and try to turn that into structured data that can then feed into machine learning model, that process of labeling data, the cost of that process has dramatically gone down because of ChatGPT and because of a lot of the latest natural language model. But on the flip side is because the AI has become so advanced, a lot of the off-the-shelf solutions tend to veer more into the black box direction. And so data interpretation and interpretation of the model output have become a more challenging task. And so at ArbiLex, we have always focused on building the most interpretable and explainable AI, which means that our job as data scientists don't really stop at generating a prediction, but also how do we explain a particular prediction to our client who are actually lawyers by training and have to rely on these predictions to make pretty high stakes decisions. So I think we increasingly are investing a lot of our time and human capital in building that bridge between AI and the real use case. And that really has been my focus is how do we become more sophisticated and accountable in the interpretation of AI output rather than just focusing on automating what AI can do for us. I think the interpretation has become more front and center as part of my business.
Okay, no, thank you. Very interesting. Joshua?
Thanks, Tets, and thanks to Litigation Finance Journal for hosting this. And, to the panelists, I'm really excited for this conversation today. And in general, the litigation finance community has been really receptive to DealBridge, and we're a brand new player, so really appreciate the community spirit out there. At DealBridge.ai, our focus lies on harnessing generative AI to transform the way litigation finance deals are originated and distributed. A lot of times historically, when we look at where data has been captured, and those are your legacy data rooms, it's been very hard to take that information out and find value. And a lot of times you're usually, relegating many small tasks to people to scrape these large sets of data to find value. What we have found is if you can automate more aspects of the data scraping process and actually bring the information to the forefront of the deal, our goal has always been to get to a yes faster on deal terms and reduce deals from taking weeks and months and making them, hours or days.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. And finally, Nick.
Thanks, Tets, and thanks, John and Litigation Finance Journal for having me on, and to my fellow panelists. Legal tech landscape in its various forms affects all parts of what we do in our business and all parts of our process. Use of technology allows us to make improvements in what we do in terms of decision-making and outcomes, but equally in the efficiency of how we operate and how we run even the most basic elements of what we do. That's across the board, whether it being using technology to do things better or using data analytics or AI for insights in assessing how we do what we do and so on, how we can improve those processes and that decision making. So it encompasses all areas: origination, so identifying potential investments; underwriting and assessment; AI for triaging; predictive analytics for underwriting research; trends, identifying those; even contract preparation and assessment, so document management also; but budgeting, analysis and monitoring, from using the data of historic budgets that we've seen, maybe for specific types of cases, to having information on when certain types of matter or size have historically concluded and what they cost to run. So in the future, I think the use of automation and further AI to improve those efficiencies and to reduce costs in all areas, things that we'll perhaps come on to talk about. So I think it has the ability to affect and assist in all aspects of our business. So it's very important, and hopefully we can expand on that in the rest of this session.
Yeah, so what's very interesting about all of this is you've all got quite a strong focus on AI. AI got, was repeated quite a lot. And obviously legal tech is quite broad, but a lot of it seems to be underpinned by AI. So I think one of the things I want to try to tackle in this one is connecting the link between what AI means as a concept, which we all seem to understand in the abstract, and how this really translates. So can I perhaps maybe ask again, to kind of open it up to all of you, to explain maybe how AI is, how this actually works in practice, how relevant, and how does it apply? How does AI apply in terms of driving a litigation funding business? And perhaps go a bit more into the granular and the detailed, and so that we can understand and the abstract better. I mean, Joshua, I was going to ask you first, because DealBridge, obviously, you focus quite a lot on the deal making side.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the history and how we got here today. When we look at scaling operational processes or getting from the more operational normalized side of data into analytics and decision making, a lot of times we have to put our traditional computer science hat on and say, how have we historically solved these problems, and what has changed in the past several years to really evolve this landscape? In a lot of ways, and I come from a very traditional engineering background, when I would go into a problem set, whether it's in financial services, insurance, or in the legal space, the first thing that we do as engineers is look to normalize a data model, look at a process, understand how people describe it with data. For those in the audience, a simple way to do this is, how do you write out your Excel spreadsheets? That's one of the best ways to simplify and start modeling data, at least in a very simplistic viewpoint. And with time, a lot of the emphasis that we've put into most technology has been about normalize and standardizing the way we look at these data sets. Now, there's a big issue when you start looking at this approach and what existing platforms have been doing, which is, this is a very human business. And because it's a very human business, there's a lot of ad hoc requests that kind of get mixed in. So although as an engineer, I would love to tell everyone to run a process a single way and be able to use the old way of solving most of these problems. And I'm not saying that you can't still use the old way. Sometimes the old way works very well for a use case. What Gen AI is doing is we're getting to a point where you don't actually have to overstructure your sales process or your due diligence process. It's where, yes, maybe the first few dozen questions that you might be asking of a given data set are the same, but we hear constantly from our clients that by the time we hit the 31st, 32nd, 33rd question, we want to be able to ask questions and get answers back that are specific to this deal and this deal alone. So being able to call audibles and ad hoc, analysis of data sets has been really hard to do before the introduction of generative AI. So that's really why a lot of us are at this inflection point where a lot of aspects of how we're approaching the problem set have really changed in just literally a few months in some use cases. It's a really rapidly evolving space as a result of foundational changes of how we approach application development.
So, I mean, Nick, you've run litigation funding businesses, for quite a number of years across different platforms, and seen this kind of, evolve over time to be incorporated in the kind of the underwriting process, whether that's the metrics of the deal or understanding the legal framework around which an opportunity is to be assessed. I mean, can you maybe develop a bit more on what Josh has said and kind of in a practical way, for maybe using a specific example, if that's possible?
Sure. Sorry, I managed not to come off mute. Apologies for that. So in terms of I mean, look, legal tech has been and is becoming increasingly relevant, and as is AI, and it has had a big impact on the litigation finance industry going back many years. But the real effect and usefulness has grown over time in advances with technology, and as we just heard, the increasing use of AI, and it makes the repetitive tasks easier. It also provides insight that's not also always readily apparent, and that is in terms of analytics of the data, whether that's trends in litigation, the sectors are the most active in the courts or certain regions, helping funders identify where they should concentrate their BD efforts or outcomes, looking at outcomes analysis, the predictive analytics, the use of AI machine learning algorithms to identify potential cases, or simply automating certain tasks that we just heard. So it's increasingly relevant. But in terms of a specific, certainly from my perspective, the use of AI to triage incoming or intake matters for the purposes of deciding where they fit in terms of what we look at. So we would identify them into, say, 4 different areas. Is it a matter which, having obtained the initial set of data, looking at it to decide whether it's something that we just simply aren't going to assess? Is it something that needs to be sent back for the purposes of further information? Does it fit the bucket, which is an area that we would consider funding, which would be from our mandate? Or does it go onto our platform for the purposes of others to have the ability to look at it and invest in that particular matter? And that's using the data and the ability to assess by looking at all of the, say, a pack of information that comes through and working out and producing some quite interesting and clever assessments in terms of the issues at hand, a quick executive summary, and an area in terms of what's the jurisdiction, what's the applicable law, all of those things which are made much easier in terms of use of resource and speed of decision making. So that's a specific example, and I think maybe we'll talk a bit more about that later, but it's having an increasing impact and certainly being used with more regularity in the industry, not just by the people on the panel, but by litigation funders generally. I think are accepting that it's a way in which they can improve operational efficiency and get to a yes much more quickly.
So that's quite interesting. So you're kind of really talking about, how it really enhances the operational aspect of the business and how that kind of interlays with the kind of the human assessment element of it. I mean, Isabel, your business is more tech focused, isn't it? And it'll be quite interesting to understand more about how ArbiLex works, in terms of kind of the better understanding of the law and the underwriting, because it's probably a bit of a contrast in the sense that it's that's about kind of improving operational efficiency and enhancing the human decision and really using the power of data to help drive some interesting, predictive outcomes.
Yeah, so at ArbiLex, the problem we're trying to solve has been the same over the years. We're just trying to deploy this process across different types of cases. But fundamentally, the problem we're trying to solve is whenever you're handed a case, typically for a litigation funder, they would ask a senior lawyer for an opinion, and sometimes they would, hire outside counsel to write a deal memo or case memo, an objective assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of different arguments before they decide whether or not this is a good opportunity. But if you really think about, the volume of deals that folks like Nick see, like that quickly becomes very unscalable, right? If you want to get to a robust opinion about the strength of the merits of the case, it would typically takes you, a month, tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a robust opinion from a third party that may or may not be objective in that specific case. So the problem we're trying to solve is, can machine learning model be more efficient and accurate at pattern spotting from the outset, such that it can give investors, claimants, lawyers, parties involved a quick but consistent and accurate signal about where that case stands at the earliest opportunity. And the way that we do that is we take a type of case. We started with investment treaty arbitration, and we turn the entire history of case law and historical cases and body of decisions and the arbitral tribunals, procedural orders and decisions into a bank of case features and case outcome, and then start building models to understand what kind of case attributes more frequently associate with what type of case outcome, such that next time we see a new investment treaty arbitration case, we look for those features and then we feed that into the model, and then the model can then generate a probability of how that case is likely to go. So that's really like the fundamentals of what we do. Is we want to use that machine learning model to give investors, parties, the earliest signal possible at the most efficient and robust and accurate way as early as possible, so that they can then start thinking about how they want to budget their resource, how they want to structure their negotiation, at the underwriting stage, how they want to, size a portfolio, how they want to price the investment. And then, when we started with investment treaty arbitration and realized the predictive performance are quite good. And then we started taking this process to, judgment enforcement. And then most recently, we took it to US patent infringement cases. So then just building out this predictive capability, case type by case type, really honing into, spotting merit signal at the earliest opportunity of a case. And I think that process is increasingly resonating with investors and our clients. And I think we also have the luxury of sort of benefit of hindsight, in the sense that a lot of cases that we made prediction years ago have turned out to be true. And so we get a pretty loyal following from certain clients that we told them this is a bad deal, and then they got really upset at us, but then years later the case lost. It's a very long sales cycle, but I'm starting to see how like the analytics is resonating with the initial non-believers once they see like the reality actually coincides more towards the data analytics rather than their own instinct. And so that has been like a pretty rewarding experience for me to see, like that kind of switch in mentality.
So obviously, one of the things about AI then is, and is the quality of the data that goes into the AI system, into the AI model. And one of the challenges, sat outside of the US is obviously the number of judgments which are available to be able to kind of input into a model. I mean, we all look to the US with great envy because everything seems to be done, very efficiently. But I mean, when we look at what AI can do in the legal industry broadly and globally, there are limitations depending on jurisdiction. So really for Joshua, how as a data scientist do you tackle that problem?
Well, if you don't have the data, you really can't do anything from a machine learning perspective. It's that simple. But I think it's taking a step back, and I guess you could say I'm a little less bullish on certain aspects of analytics for all the reasons you've outlined. We have a common phrase in the industry: garbage in, garbage out. So you can only make so much predictive decisions based upon the quality of your data. But I think what has changed, because when we're talking for the audience about, AI in general, as we start looking into the different areas within it, I think what a lot of us have discovered and found some really good use cases is Gen AI is very good at taking scattered information. So even if there's data out there and it's not in a easy to reach part of the world, you're able to start bringing value. So just because there isn't a central authority or a central database to something, what we're going to start seeing is obscure data sets are going to be run through generative AI algorithms and then normalized so that they get the same outcome as an overly structured database might be in the US. So I do think that there's that element. My bigger concern, though, in the machine learning and whether you're doing supervised and unsupervised or reinforcement models, is the following. The fact that at some point, and the biggest concern we hear from most of our clients in the industry, and why banks and law firms have been rushing to block the chat GPTs of the world, is they're worried about PII and various other proprietary information making it into trained data sets. So our approach has always been localize models. Now, there's a trade-off to this. When you start localizing models and giving people 100% access to their data and only their data, there's a trade-off. So you limit the ability to run certain analytics because of the fact that there's smaller amounts of data. Now, what you're still able to do, and I think this is where we think the value in analytics is more in the comparative and referential checks of data. So, starting from it, you have a data room, you're able to extract the data and normalize it using some type of Gen AI model. It's localized, so there's no risk of your information going out to the world or being used as trading sets by the OpenAIs and the Googles and the Metas of the world. And then where you start getting into is, has the data that they've provided, does it have a lot of information that acts other pieces of information in the data set? That's where your referential checks come into. And then you can start getting into analytics where you start comparing deals that you've historically done, but it becomes harder to provide certain levels of information security while also broadly giving access to these wider models. So like anything, and I think a lot of us are trying to find that balance between keeping our clients happy from an information security perspective and also building out these predictive models that actually add value. So I'm not bearish. I'm not overly bullish. I just think it becomes a use case that your clients are ultimately comfortable with from an information security perspective. And that heavily routes how you would adapt these technologies and these use cases.
Okay, I think it's probably just worth separating this conversation out into two parts. Joshua, what you talked about is really interesting, and it's one of the risk considerations of AI. So this information security from a client's perspective, which is hugely relevant for law firms. We'll come back to that, but just before we do, Nick, I just wanted to go back to the question about the actual data input in terms of assessing cases. So looking at judgments, publicly available, information to be able to come up with case predictions, which was in terms of kind of your experience, which is very extensive across multiple jurisdictions. How have you challenged the different kind of quality data, the quality of data that you can use in Lexolent, which is obviously a global platform looking at cases across the board?
Sure. It's evident that the better the data you've got, the better your analysis is going to be. I think it's probably unfair to say that there isn't sufficient data in the UK. There's clearly much more data. It's a much larger jurisdiction and is historically much more advanced in terms of the ability to access that data in the US. The ability to get hold of the data in the UK isn't so bad, and you still have the ability to make assessments of many millions of cases in terms of not necessarily in a particular area, but certainly there's adequate data to start the process. Now, the issue perhaps that we face is it that good that you're going to rely on it ultimately? Is it something which is going to replace humans? Probably not. That may divide opinion, I don't know. But the enhanced data analytics are very, very useful to funders, and the ability to assess and evaluate historical data is obviously incredibly helpful. And that might be through the use of predictive analytics, through the use of LLMs to identify arguments in particular cases, who made the arguments, to what extent they were successful. I think things have advanced significantly from just deciding what happens in a particular case when in particular types of case, in particular types of court, although that is always going to be useful going forward. And I think identifying certain types of case against certain defendants, what happens in that vast array of data that you have is clearly going to be easier in a jurisdiction like, various jurisdictions in the US where there is more data available. But either way, it's still a useful tool, even in the UK, and maybe an essential tool in the future, given the ability to assess that data, produce trends, identify outcomes, not necessarily specific outcomes, but identifying certain things to consider. And I think over time, there might be a division of opinion on whether this process and using AI is a tool or whether it's a replacement to maybe complement the human underwriting. But I think it's clear that in certain jurisdictions, you want to use every tool available, and they may be imperfect in terms of they'll be better in certain places than others, but they're always going to improve your process, particularly in the predictions and the underwriting, because you want to use everything that's available. And I don't think you'll ever get past the point where, you know, human experience, instinct, and EQ are going to be redundant. Maybe I'm wrong, but for now, I think you just have to assess how much reliance you place upon it, depending on where you're doing it, is perhaps the way I'd answer your question.
Okay. Just a kind of a general question, and maybe one for Isabel. I mean, a lot of lawyers will always say, you know, this is all fascinating, but ultimately this is all, you know, this is a human industry. Judgments are going to be made by judges. You know, there's, you know, every situation, every circumstance is going to be different, because it's going to come down to the behavior of the individuals in those proceedings at any given moment in time. Is there a way that AI can capture the behavioral dynamics of litigation?
Say more, what's behavior dynamic?
Yeah, behavioral dynamics. So, you know, is it possible that, you know, that you can build into these models, you know, how certain judges might react in given situations, kind of given certain things, and how much does that kind of feed in? Because obviously a lot of lawyers and a lot of litigation funders are not just assessing the merits of a case, but, you know, how the courts might respond, and one judge may view something very differently to how another judge. I mean, is there, you know, not necessarily judges, but the participants, is there a way that AI can capture those behavioral dynamics to contribute to the kind of the underwriting, the origination process?
So, in general, I think we need to have realistic expectation of AI. And that realistic expectation comes from what humans are uniquely good at are not necessarily the things that AI are good at, and vice versa. And in this particular context of outcome prediction, AI is really good at least the type of AI we built, is really good at pattern spotting. Meaning, if I train the model to look for recurring features of particular cases, such in your example being specific judges in specific jurisdiction, when coming up against specific type of argument or case, then AI in general has a very good ability to assign the weighting to a particular attribute and how that impacts prediction in a way that humans, even if instinctively you can come to the same place, you can't really quantify the impact and magnitude of a specific attribute in outcome prediction. However, the other thing that we need to be realistic is, you know, cases are decided not just on pattern, but also on case-specific fact attributes, right? Credibility of the witness, right? Availability of certain piece of key evidence. The thing is, if you train the AI to look for things that are so specific to one case, you end up overfitting the model, meaning your AI is so good at spotting one type of case that applies to one specific scenario, it loses its predictive power over a generalized pool of cases. So in general, I think what I would caution attorneys is use AI and model to do to get a second opinion on things that you believe are patterns, right? So in arbitration, it would be, you know, attorney might have a view on certain tribunal members, on certain, you know, tribunal composition. Those questions that goes into pattern and decision history, models and data scientists are way better at quantifying that and actually honing in the significance of that to a specific case. But then on things like, do we want to, you know, do we want to produce this witness as opposed to the other witness? That's not something that I think we should realistically expect the AI scientist to answer for you in a specific case. And so the last point I want to point out is, even if you do everything right in data-driven decision-making, you can still lose for like unforeseeable reason in a particular case, right? Like the example you often give me is like, hey, what if the jury one jury member just decides that, you know, wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide that they don't like this specific attorney on that day? Yes, and that's something that unfortunately neither model nor attorneys will be able to control. And those are what we call like the error terms. And so as data scientists, the hope is if we do data science right and do it over and over time, the law of large numbers will be able to accommodate or kind of ameliorate a lot of these case-specific idiosyncrasies that neither human nor model are able to predict upfront. So those are my 3 ways of looking at this problem.
Joshua, as a data scientist, you must have a few interesting thoughts, comments.
Yeah, from a behavioral perspective, I think generative AI is the first of its kind where machines are really learning behaviors of human beings. And I don't mean from an inventive or innovation or necessarily something of uniqueness. But what they're able to do and what we're finding is we're able to build personas. So let's say you're about to go to a judge and they've made particular rulings in the past and have a certain way of talking to these rulings. We're getting to the point where we can ask our models to, create an argument that this judge would find preferable, or how this judge would actually write this argument. And so where we've really done a lot of the work in creating personas has been more on the sales process, where we're basically modeling the behaviors of your best salesmen and women and basically saying, how do they interact with clients? What do they say about a particular deal to get them interested? We want to get away from the world of people, chasing for what's that next thing that I have to action. So what we've found is behaviors can be tied into Gen AI models. I think they become a little bit harder if we're talking about your traditional machine learning, as certain behaviors are harder to quantify. But in regard of using and creating personas and talking in a voice of someone, I think generative AI is really changing how we approach, that human connection and being able to emulate it.
Okay. So we're going to have 10 minutes, so we're going to move on to risks and benefits, but just very quickly before we do, a very quick response from all of you. AI's value to litigation funding. If we broke litigation funding down to 3 components, origination, underwriting, and execution, where would you say AI has the most to contribute? Nick?
I think origination is an area which is important for the purposes of the fact that you can identify trends. You can use use that to identify particular areas where you can push forward with your business development, where you should be focusing your efforts. I think in terms of identifying other factors as to which is hot at the time, matters where the industry is particularly litigious. There was a time when aviation leasing companies were taking significant action. That was identified quite clearly in the statistics of seeing particular piece of litigation being issued. So origination is pretty important. In terms of underwriting, it's a tool. I think it's a tool it's important for the purposes of analyzing what defenders have said before, what cases even to the point where you can perhaps take it forward to the area where they've reached which defendants settle in what cases at what time. Perhaps not now, but it's having extra data to make the assessment to the best of your ability at that point. Equally, in terms of monitoring, not just not necessarily in origination and triage cases, but monitoring what's going on in the case. Seeing where they are in relation to budgets, having the data on what types of case cost what amount of money historically. Those are all really useful factors, but I think certainly from my perspective at the moment, origination is where it's most useful.
Joshua?
So maybe I'm cheating in my response, but I think it's really dependent on what type of AI you're implementing for a particular use case. So there's a lot that we're still discovering, but ultimately, when we think about the world of Gen AI, I think it is extremely helpful in origination and due diligence. As we get into decision making and getting into comparative analysis, where you can say whether one deal is better than the other or predict where the outcome will be, that's where you're getting into the machine learning. So I do think from a walk before you run perspective, and what I would recommend to most people is don't start with the analytics and the machine learning. first layer into doing a better job managing your data so that you can later on have more detailed discussions with already a structured data set. So I do think, in regard to the analytics, I'm bullish on it in some ways, but I think that a lot of times companies need to first start by managing their data sets and understanding what they've historically found most relevant as they're selecting cases.
Isabel, origination, underwriting, execution.
I think Nick's instinct is on point. I always, what I've seen our clients do with our predictive analytics is the earlier they come to us, the more productive the discussion tends to be. If they come to us at the underwriting stage, they tend to already have invested a lot of resources into diligencing a case. And if the analytics disagrees with their existing assessment, then the discussion tends to get really emotional when it really should not be. This is like I think the biggest learning I've had is this is a very new industry, and its interaction with data analysis. It's also pretty preliminary, and so that's like a lot of people they take the data analysis like almost too personal. So from that perspective, I like to use AI at origination before a particular portfolio managers or investment manager have already formed a very strong opinion about a case, and therefore they can see the data analytics and engage with analytics in a more objective manner. And yeah, but I think over time, I think, where our industry currently is a little bit like stock picking back in the 90s, right? So if we think of, stock trading trajectory as being, a guidance to where our industry will evolve, I think in 10 years' time, the litigation finance funds that would achieve the greatest scales and return consistently will have an element of AI across the deal cycle. And that's, I think that, like where they might start with origination, but the benefits of the AI it's a no-brainer. Like if I run a fund, like this is just like something that I would think about integrating at every stage of the deal. But if I would say if a fund wants to start somewhere, I think origination is like the part that is, it doesn't hurt anyone's feeling at this point. The easiest to integrate with us.
Good. Well, we'll reconvene in 10 years' time and we can have this discussion, see how if that turns out to be true. Right. So really the risks of AI to litigation funding and legal tech more broadly. I mean, obviously we are in the litigation world, we are all inherently wired to be worried about all the things that can go wrong. Firstly, a general question to you all. I mean, what are the biggest risks of AI to a litigation funder or to the litigation funding industry? Nick?
I guess the biggest risk is not using it, to be honest, frankly. Use of technology in all industries can only be a benefit. It's the same in litigation finance. So having the ability to analyze data, whether it's an origination that we just talked about, triaging, case assessment, monitoring, gives you a better understanding of what's going on in the market and what's going on in your own portfolio. That technology and information and the analysis it provides can only assist you in the success and management of your fund. That said, there are issues over random use of ChatGPT, having your data put in places that you shouldn't. But I think, to me, the biggest risk is not using AI, frankly.
It's very bullish, like Isabel. Joshua?
Yeah, so my biggest concern is in not adopting it in an effective way, not picking the right tool for the use case, and effectively, because this is a new industry, and there's a lot of learning that's going into it in real time. So, and as I mentioned before, I also have some concerns around, the overgeneralized large language models and, offering your data to them for training sets. I think that, and we haven't covered this, but for those that are familiar with hallucinations, this is the scenario where ChatGPT and other tools will go in and tell you that I know the answer, but they are not giving you the right information. So I really think that a big risk is overgeneralizing these models and needing to get into small language models, or what we sometimes refer to as personalized models, to mitigate the risks of making up information or finding patterns in large data sets that are really never meant to be connected. In general, the other thing that I think is very relevant is the fact that we're still trying to discover how to get to more of a real world application of real-time data coming into these models. So another example of this is if you go into ChatGPT and ask a particular question, it might respond back to you that I only have data that's up to July 2022. So a lot of risks come into the real world need of these models, whether they're large language or small language, to find that gap between compiling of all of those sets of data and making them more real time. I think we're not very far away from a world where these models are hours or minutes or eventually seconds updated. And I think I'm less of a believer that we're going to get to the generalized AI in the near term future, but I think at least shrinking the training sets and publishing models will be highly reduced, and that's where I see the biggest risks in this space.
So Isabel, same question to you, but perhaps we can add an overlay to that question. Is the history of AI has always gone a bit kind of cyclically. In the 1980s it was very popular. One of the popular culture as well was fantasizing an AI world where by 2024 we'd be doing all these kind of wonderful things, which hasn't happened because of what was, I think, termed the AI winter, when everyone lost interest in AI. So to overlay the question about what are the risks, are those risks also such that actually the enthusiasm around AI dies away, and we go back to what a lot of lawyers think, which is it's all a human business, and all this legal tech is nonsense?
I think that actually ties into the biggest risk I see, which is AI is supposed to be a solution to a problem. So I always caution, I sometimes speak at founders gathering, and they ask me what are some of the AI applications that can get VC dollar, and I'm like, that's just the wrong way to think about it. Like, you don't pick the hottest technology and then you invent a problem you're trying to solve with that technology that's the latest available. I always start from the problem side. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And if it's something that AI can help solve, great. If it's not, then yeah, maybe humans are better. The problem that I'm always trying to solve in what I do is the law is supposed to be predictable, right? And so far, for hundreds of years, like, that interpretation authority have rested solely with the most senior partner within law firms. But the basis of generating those judgment calls are publicly available case law data, and so which can be quantified, which can be structured, which can be modeled. So that's number one observation, is like, the problem that humans are trying to solve right now, the underlying data set can already be quantified using machine learning approach. So then the second prong to that is then who's better at solving that problem? And then you get to the point of like, it may not be a choice. It could be like a lawyer augmented by AI is way better at solving a particular problem than a lawyer without access to the AI tools that are being built. Then lastly, I think the thing that we need to think about is Gen AI is a new technology. Its use cases are still in its early days. Its applications are speculative. So I think a lot of the discussions that happen today, like depending on where OpenAI latest offering goes in the next few years, will significantly change. But for the type of sort of old-fashioned machine learning models, what we do using label data to train model and generate pattern, there are sort of industry standard practice metrics. Like, how do I know if a model is generating meaningful signal? There are metrics we look at, right? AURC, there's calibration tests, and we publish those metrics on our website, like in real time. If the model is not doing what we think it's supposed to do, at least in the machine learning case, in the old-fashioned model case, there are metrics that will clue you into the real predictive power of those models. And that level of just accountability of machine learning model, and I think a lot of attorneys and very senior decision makers, that they don't really ask of that of their team, of their associates, right? Like, think about when was the last time you saw a funder like question their PMs like, okay, you want to invest in this case? How often were you right? Like when was the last time you were wrong? What, like what percentage of the calls that you've made in the past year actually translate into, the return expectations that, so, but we can ask those questions of AI model, and we ask those predictive, accountability questions of our model every single day. And I think that that's the level of accountability that model can introduce to the investment industry. And I think we've seen that trend happening in other asset class, and there's no reason why it won't happen in litigation finance.
Okay, very interesting. I think we should probably wrap up here, because there are probably quite a few questions which are worth asking. We've only got 10 minutes left, but really just to summarize, I think what's been very interesting about this is, while you're all very bullish and confident about the potential of AI, I think you've also all stressed the point that it's not some magic wand, and it really is about kind of enhancing what we have at the moment, rather than trying to replace it. And I think that's probably the key message that a lot of people often kind of jump to with AI. Is they say, why would computers ever replace human beings? That's not what we're talking about here. So no, thank you all very much. Very, very interesting, very insightful. Back to you, John.
Thank you so much, Tets. Really appreciate moderating this event and contributing to the flow of the conversation. That was really great. I am just going to, we have a few questions here, so let me get to the first one. This will be for all the panelists. Can the panelists comment on how it is possible to derive predictive analytics in litigation, where the vast majority of case outcomes are through confidential settlements and therefore cannot be part of the data set? So if the AI focuses on data sets that miss 95% of case outcomes, how can it ever be predictive in nature? I'll let whoever wants to jump in and handle that one.
I'll answer that. I answer that question or a variation of that question on a daily basis. So there are two things. One is whether or not AI is predictive is an empirical question. Okay, so if the AI is not predictive, if truly the data set is too small, what you're going to see is the AI predict this is a strong case, that case is going to lose, and the AI predict this is a weak case, and that case is going to win. Right. So everything the AI says is just wrong. What we found is, even just with the minority of cases that end up in publicly available decisions through the judiciary or through the jury, even just taking that sample of data that's called publicly available decisions as training data set, what we're able to generate as prediction is already statistically significant in spotting signal for a case. Now, and that I don't think that's actually a coincidence. The reason being is this is not a problem. Like the unavailability of settlement data is not a unique challenge for AI. It's a unique challenge for the litigation system, like period. Right. So what we're doing is we're facing the same challenge of data availability issues that attorneys are facing, litigators are facing, everybody who's part of the judiciary system is facing. But they are still making judgment calls based on personal predictions of how the case is going to go. They're still giving their clients advice based on what their personal predictions are about a specific case. And so all we're doing is we take that judgment and we quantify it, and then we put it through a model, and the model is giving us empirical signal that actually suggests that there is something meaningful here. So we publish our, the cases, we use our AI rating system for cases. Cases that we predict are as A, meaning 75% or above chance of success. On average, 91.6% of those cases are successful. And that's just using the publicly available case decision data. So if the AI is not doing meaningful job in predicting, then we won't see that kind of signal. So unfortunately, fortunately for us, I think, is that lack of availability of settlement data doesn't really take away the predictive power of a model that's trying to predict a case outcome, because the judiciary system, historically, everybody faced the same data availability issue. And secondly, the judicial system in general is designed to generate that level of predictability for participants. And I think the model just, quantify that level of predictability that's built in. And I think we are seeing the benefit of that.
Thank you for that, Isabel. Very detailed answer. Does anybody, either of the other panelists, have anything they want to say on that? It's okay. If not, we can move on to the next question. All right, next question. How can we ensure that the test data used for artificial intelligence systems in global litigation is accurate, unbiased, and regularly updated to reflect current legal standards and practices? Who wants to jump in? How about?
So I think part of that comes down to data will change over time and become stale. So one of the things that I think is most important, and this is what I was mentioning about large language models, but versus more personalized small language models, is that when you're actually doing a lot of things with Gen AI, it's good to have snapshots of time. Whereas when you're looking at a case right now, the information would have changed. So you're really in a lot of ways needing to rebuild those models for that present day information. I think coming into and understanding that time series nature of data is extremely valuable, but it's even easier if you're localizing those models and building them off of the most recent data set and not actually going off of the historic information. I'm not sure if I answered that question, if there's like a follow-up, but the way that we do it is we don't care as much about the historical data when we're running the operational side of it. We're looking at the real live, the data room information that's available at that moment in time.
That's really interesting. Anybody else?
So I think there are data science metrics. So first of all, before we even train any model, we run a lot of summary statistics to look at the data. And so those tests specifically goes into like, are there any selection bias of the data that happens at the source, right? So like we think a lot about the quality of data from the selection bias perspective. So that is something that a good data scientist or good data science team is wired to think about at the source. What kind of bias does that data set introduce? One way to mitigate that is for our key variables, we often use multiple data sets, merging and cross-referencing to make sure that specific data that we rely on for prediction are accurate. If it's validated by multiple sources, then we tend to have better confidence in relying on those case attributes. On the updating side, if you sign up to our platform, the case rating gets updated as new information of the case emerges. And key trigger points for specific case prediction to be updated are predefined. So for instance, in a patent litigation case, and I don't know how much folks are familiar with US patent infringement suits, the alleged infringer typically will have up to a year to challenge the original validity of the patent with a parallel body of decision makers called PTAB. So basically, whenever a patent infringement suit is filed, the underlying patent ID that we scraped from the complaint document will keep looking for, has there been validity challenge in PTAB with respect to those patent ID, and whenever there is, then the model will update to reflect that enhanced risk of a parallel PTAB proceeding. So there are key events that, based on our understanding of the model, that whenever occur, will have a impact on a specific case prediction. And we typically tell users upfront, like, okay, for this is our prediction, but this is our level of certainty. And for certain high uncertainty predictions, you can expect an update as so-and-so event happens. So a lot of those time series aspect, if we understand the data and the patterns well enough, we'll be able to advise our clients and kind of look out for those specific trigger points for rating update.
All right, thank you so much. We have time for one final question. How can lawyers and funders guard themselves against the risks of information breach in a way that allows AI to perform as well as it could?
So I think the main thing there is localizing models is extremely important. I think, you need to have control of your data sets. You need to make sure that you're not running the risk of your data sets being made available to other people. And I think ultimately you need to be the quarterback of your own data. So that's, that's why there's a lot of concern with people just broadly adapting, Chat GPT and its basic implementation, and that's really where we're seeing a lot of clients come to us and say, what can we do from a large language model perspective, but we actually control every aspect of it and own our own destiny around it.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're right at time. So that concludes this event. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. We got a nice range of perspectives, a really timely topic. So we're glad to bring this to you to close out the year. As I mentioned at the top, we will have more events next year. Please submit any ideas for topics. We're always open to that. And all registrants, you will all receive a recording of this event. So please stay tuned for that email. I want to thank our moderator, Tets Ishikawa, did a fantastic job. And also our panelists, of course, Rowles-Davies, Joshua Masia, and Isabel Yang. All really great, thoughtful, insightful responses. Did a great job of we covered a lot of ground on legal tech and went pretty deep. So we hope you enjoyed it. You can also check out our past conferences and our daily reporting on the industry. All of that is on our website, www.litigationfinancejournal.com. And we hope you enjoyed this event. We'll see you next year for more events. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.